10 spooky stories that will keep you up at night. Sleep tight. With Halloween just around the corner, it's time to delve into the dark, the eerie, and the unsettling. What better time to celebrate the scariest holiday of the year other than 12 a.m. on a chilly night? Below are a handful of unsettling stories, some true, some fabricated. If you haven't been scared yet, it's time to get rolling. Grab a blanket and a hot drink and dive into these deliciously spooky stories, and hope a monster doesn't grab your feet. 1. 2-sentence horror story. This brief gem comes from Reddit user Adam Farmer. I finally found my wife the kidney she needed. It took forever to track down everyone she donated organs to after the crash. 2. Mom averts danger. Forget monsters, people are terrifying. This camping story from Reddit user MoreNapkinsBLS will solidify that. I've posted this on my other account, copying and pasting it here. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer, and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill. Huge foothills of the coastal mountains, about a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. I DK what about? Wasn't suspicious at the time, and they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp, and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth, because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent, and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you, he was not there, just us girls like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. TL Doctor, 2 girls at a campsite alone, people outside tent in the middle of the night, and my mom pulled some badassery. The Giphy opens in a new tab. 3. Ouija board knocks back. Reddit user excrement pronoun wrote, in high school my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before, and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town, things we neither knew or cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm in the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical, and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes, and then spelled out KNOCK, then the planchette stopped moving. We just all stared at it silently, and then there was a rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside, and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that F-bean board again. 4. Forgotten memory. Redditor Call Me Egg shared this horrific tale. Growing up, my bedroom was the only one that faced the front of the house and street. When I was about 8 or 9, I woke up to my dad calmly but firmly telling me to get up, go in the bathroom, and shut the door. I was annoyed because I was half asleep, but I listened. Apparently I was more tired than I realized because I fell asleep on the bathroom floor. The next morning I asked my mom what happened. She seemed oblivious and confused. I looked at my dad like she was crazy, and I asked him why he had woken me up. He denied doing it. I was becoming frustrated to the point of tears, but I ultimately let it go. Fast forward to college. I was home one break, and I decided to ask again. I had got of that night off and on for years, and it still bothered me. This time, my dad goes, "Huh? I was wondering if you even remember that." Turns out that a lot of houses on our block were being vandalized and robbed all those years ago. Someone had broken into the garage and was inside the house. My room was partially over the garage. My dad heard it happen and quietly got me to safety. Police were called, the guy ran. He was never caught, however, and my parents didn't want a terrified kid on their hands, so for years they pretended like nothing had ever happened. It wasn't supernatural, but it was unsettling for sure. See also Halloween movies for scaredy cats. 5. A Clockwork Orange-style break-in. This story comes from Reddit user Josh II. Not to me, but to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m., she heard loud knocking on her back door. She went to go check it out and saw a lady banging on the door asking for my sister to let her in. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her in since she had a newborn in the house and didn't want to interfere. She told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. The lady told my sister to not call the police and to let her in. This is where my sister got suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later, and they told my sister that the same situation happened a few streets down. Apparently the couple would do this act to get into people's homes. I'm sure this is very common, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew just creeps me out. Some real Clockwork Orange shit. The Giphy opens in a new tab. 6. Phantom alarms. Reddit user 666 number off. A beast shared this story about strange occurrences in their dad's home. When I was in high school, I had a lot of these experiences. At the house my dad lived in at the time, it was really old, built in the early 1800s. There were plenty of times I'd be sitting in the living room and distinctly hear the cabinets opening and closing in the kitchen. It was just me and my dad that lived in the house, and you could clearly see when his bedroom door was shut and he was asleep, but still hear it. Normally my dad worked 7 to 3 but occasionally worked a PM or overnight shift. One night he was working until 11. I was 17 at the time. Around 8 or so, I'm sitting in my room playing Borderlands and think I hear footsteps coming from the living room, which was adjacent to my bedroom, and assume my dad's home early. Go back to playing Borderlands. I keep hearing the steps, so I pause the game and listen, and the footsteps are just slowly pacing back and forth between the living room and the kitchen in a steady rhythm. I laid in bed scared shitless and actually counted the steps. Every time it took 15 paces to the living room, 15 back to the kitchen. Needless to say, I did not fucking sleep that night. Had another situation at my mom's house about 2 years prior to this. Out of nowhere my alarm clock would go off at midnight every night. I assumed it was busted and got rid of it. Fast forward 2 years, my mom gets another brand new alarm clock for my room, also when I was 17. Suddenly, alarm goes off at midnight. I thought nothing of it, turned it off. Happened again the next night, and then my sister pointed out the old one I had that did it. So I checked and made sure no alarms were set, double-checked at 11:56. Sure enough, 4 minutes later my alarm goes off. Freaked out, I threw it out. That next night was my dad's night to have me. I had a buddy of mine over and my dad was working that night. He left for work around 2 a.m. and my friend had brought over an iPod dock to listen to music on. Didn't have the clock set or anything. My friend knew nothing of the last couple nights, so I knew he wasn't just fucking with me. So about 2 minutes after my dad leaves, we hear an alarm clock coming from my room. I went in, and you know how if you just plug in a clock without setting it, the numbers just blink on and off. Well, it was doing that. As soon as I picked it up, the clock set itself to 12 o'clock, and then just turned off by itself. So, yeah, fuck paranormal shit. I'm not religious at all, but I am 100% convinced that it happens. 7. Mom's scary boyfriend. Reddit user had noticed that their mom's boyfriend was pretty weird, but one cold night they had an especially bad feeling. About 5 years ago, my mom started dating a guy she met on a dating site. That part is fine. I had recently started dating the woman who would later become my wife, and we had met online. I'll just refer to her as my wife for this story. Anyway, my wife and I never really liked this guy. We didn't think he was mean or anything like that, just a little creepy. He was quiet, he kept his eyes closed a lot and occasionally said odd things like offering my wife a chocolate and then popping one in his mouth, closing his eyes, and moaning as he let it melt in his mouth. One time my wife and I were visiting my mom, but she got called into work, so we waited at her house. Her boyfriend was over, but he spent the entire several hours just hanging out in her bedroom with the door closed. Just before Christmas, my mom and this guy started having some difficulties. My wife and I were visiting her for the holidays, and she dropped all of her problems on us, and we listened carefully and told her our opinions and suggested that she would be better off without him. She already had her mind made up though, and decided to break up with him. On Christmas Eve, we spent the night at my mom's and got up early on Christmas morning to visit my dad at his house. We didn't plan to spend the night at my dad's, but we got snowed in, which was actually a nice Christmas surprise. The next day we left as soon as we could get through the snow, and my wife suggested that we stop by my mom's house on the way so that we could see if she was okay. My wife just had a really bad feeling about my mom's now ex-boyfriend. My mom's car was in the driveway, but that doesn't mean much because she lives close enough to work that she often walks, and it hadn't snowed in her town. She also never locks her door, which drives me crazy, so we let ourselves in. That's when we see blood oozing out of the refrigerator's water dispenser. It had filled up the spill container and was leaking onto the floor and had made a puddle. My wife screamed and I freaked out. I fully expected to see my mom's head in the freezer. I nervously opened the freezer to find a bag of frozen cherries that had been opened, crammed into the freezer so that it fell onto the ice dispenser and melted. TL Doctor got my mom was decapitated by her creepy ex-boyfriend. 8. She heard it through the wall. This haunted story comes from Reddit user GoBustersBM. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys' Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 a.m. I had heard a small voice saying, "Mom, Mom, Mommy." I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around, and I was still hearing the voice, but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed, and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 a.m. again, my dog had started to whimper at outdoor, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you, where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back. I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed, and I felt the fucking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room, and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. Wait, Giphy opens in a new tab. 9. You're lucky I'm scared too. Reddit user Megaman1410 shared this story about a letter from a burglar who visited their home. TL Doctor, some random thief was in my house, who I spoke to, who left me a weird message. Was sitting in my room at like 11:30 p.m, heard lots of shit downstairs, assumed it was my mom. Heard her walk up the stairs to my room, stopped. I called out to her, she didn't say anything, and walked downstairs. I went down about a half hour later to find a piece of paper with the words "You're lucky I'm scared too" on it, and a whole bunch of shit was missing. Called Mom. She still hadn't arrived home from a dinner she was at with her friends. I called the cops and locked myself in the bathroom, but I think they left when they realized I was still home. Probably the most scared I've ever been when I was hiding in the bathroom. 10. A ghost testing the waters. Redditor and Martenor talks about their first night after moving into a haunted house. I currently live in a haunted house. I've heard voices, footsteps, lights have been turned on/off. One of the ghosts has a thing for silverware. I hear it clattering in the drawer all the time, and sometimes a knife or two will end up in the wrong slot in the drawer. But the strangest, scariest experience I had was the first night I spent in the house. I wasn't finished moving in, there were boxes everywhere. I didn't even have my mattress up there yet. I was bedding on an old futon mattress watching a video on my phone when I get the pins and needles feeling of my feet falling asleep. Except it wasn't on my feet, it was on the top of my head in the shape of a hand. I said, "Good night," turned off my light, and tried to sleep. When I woke up, my closet door was ajar, but other than that everything was otherwise untouched.